All right, if you turned in the Chapter 3 test, you should have gotten it back. All right, if for some reason you say, oh, I turned it in and I didn't get one back, then see me during the break. All right. The Chapter 4 test, you can turn in tomorrow if you need to. I don't know when it said it was due, but that's fine. Just turn it in before I leave tomorrow. Some of you have already turned it in, which is fine also. All right. I'm not going to give you a test on 5 or on 6. We're just going to do the project for both of them. And even tomorrow, there's a few things that, that the project for tomorrow is pretty substantial, and it goes into 3 things. We're only going to cover parts of that, just so you know. And again, I mentioned this to you before, but I'm saying it again because I want everybody to hear it. And that is, the plan is that next week we will be going over a couple tutorials. I don't know if we'll get them both done in a week. I don't know if we'll get one done in a week. I don't know how it'll work. All right. But like I said, that's the plan. We will be going over a tutorial getting started with EF, which is Entity Framework Database first, and getting started with Entity Framework 6 Code first. And you will hopefully by the end of that understand the difference between them. When we finish those, the next day, whenever that is, we will have a test, a hands-on test on chapters 1 through 6. Does that make sense to everyone? I've changed out in Inside Ranking, I've changed it around. I was originally going to give you a test on 1 and 2, another one on 3 and 4, and another one on 5 and 6, but I just decided to combine them into one. I think it'll be easier for everybody doing it that way. Plus, it'd be a lot harder to write those tests when we only went through, certain things for both of those. All right. So the plan is today to go over Chapter 5. Again, we may find that we're done with this by maybe 2 o'clock. I don't know. All right. I think I've shown this to you before, and I even sent you another email on this, but if you would indulge me for a second, please, and look up on the screen here. I just want to make sure that you all do get this. I don't want it where somebody says, I didn't know that. All right. And that is that, again, if you do go out to YouTube and you go out to my channel that's out there, and all you have to do is just search for me, so Jeff Scott, Rankin Technical College. It's always funny because I bet you if I counted it's closer to 3,000, but that's fine. I don't really care. So if I go out here, I do have a channel devoted to this class. All right. And the thing I've kept in there as the first lecture is that uninstall that we did the first day of 2017 and the install of 2019. That said, every time I go through a chapter, they're in here. All right. This summer, I went through this entire book. So there are probably somewhere upwards of 50 to 60 lectures on all 27 chapters of the book. And that's what you see if you start going down in here. But if you notice, there's 205 videos. You only see 100 on each screen. All right. And the only thing I wanted to tell you was, for instance, if you really had problems with Chapter 4, all right, then what you'll see in here, if you go down far enough and you start looking, is I've got, all the chapters are in here, including Chapter 4, which I did over like 8 lessons or something like that. What I tried to do this summer was I only spent 15 to 20 minutes on each tape. All right. Why? Because I just, again, for a lot of reasons, but it just got to be too much after a while to sit here for an hour and just do it in front of nobody. All right. So that stuff is in there. In addition, at the top of that, what you'll see. Oh, okay. Come on. There we go. All right. In addition, the stuff that we're going to go over starting next week, that being the Entity Framework Code first and the Entity Framework Database first, I've done lectures on all those also. All right, so if you do miss next week or whatever, you'd be able to go and hopefully at least catch back up. All right. And this is just an aside before we get started. We will in just a second. But the first year people, we had a talk this morning. I had one gentleman in the class who has a doctor's appointment in a couple weeks. And it's at 10 o'clock. No, 10:30. So he said he can come at 8 o'clock, but at about 10:05 or so, he's got to leave. And he said, how do I get marked that day? What do you think? Absent. If you miss more than 15 minutes of a class, these aren't my rules. These are the rules of the institution. All right? Now, we do have a place where when I take attendance, I can write notes, and I will write that note in there for him. The reason that I'm telling you that, though, is I've got another person in the class, and she said, well, remember last week when we had those real bad storms? I said, yeah. She said, I live in a rural area, and she said, I made it, but I almost didn't even come in. I said, if that happens, all right, if it's sort of icy or whatever and the school doesn't close and you're not going to come, send me an email so I can put that in there right away. And if you forget to do it, send me an email when you get back or tell me when you get back because I can put it in there. That way, if it ever becomes an issue, we had a student 2 years ago, she missed 10 days. She wasn't kicked out. All right, why? Okay, well, as it turned out, she had a situation where literally she had no one other than daycare who could watch her 1-year-old and 3-year-old who kept getting double ear infections. And when that happened, she had to take them in. She had doctor's excuses, etc. That's one of the reasons the school went from excused absences to no excused absences. Because too many people were doing that, and it wasn't to be mean to people, but it was to more reflect on the job. That when you're on the job, if you miss, you miss. All right? I mean, if you're on the job and you have a meeting today, it doesn't matter if you're sick, if your kid's sick, if your car doesn't start, you aren't there. And that's one of the reasons they went to that policy. Again, I'm not saying it's a right policy or it's a wrong policy. Because this guy was a little perturbed about it. He said, well, what can I do? I said, well, you can go to Mr. Corrigan. He goes, well, what's that going to do? I said, he'll listen to you. He said, will he change anything? I said, no, he doesn't have the power to change anything. And they said, okay, then who else do I go to? I said, you can go to Ms. Heron or call her at the St. Louis campus. And he said, can she change it? And I said, no. But she'd at least hear what you had to say. He said, well, what if I want to change it? I said, then what they'll both tell you is you should get involved in student government and see if you can change it. But I will tell you that part of this policy changing over to the no excused absences, to my knowledge, was the person who at the time was the vice president of the college, Mr. Don Pohl, who's now the president. So I don't think you're going to change that, is what I'm telling you. And I just want people to understand that. All right? Literally, what I do is I accrue a certain amount of time off, and one of the things that I accrue is what's called PTO. All right, it's personal time off. And I've got about 7 hours. I've got to take for tomorrow like 2 hours of that so I can leave early. All right? Okay, so I mean, none of us are immune from this is what I want to say. All right, Chapter 5. Starts on page 95. It's approximately 20 pages long, 23 or 24, I don't know. But it's on Razor. And much of the stuff in here, you'll either say I've already seen or pretty much it just makes sense. This is the project they work on in here, in my humble opinion, is much easier than the one we worked on yesterday. All right? So it says in this chapter, I give you a quick tour of Razor syntax. The thing to realize is where you write Razor syntax, you've heard me say this already, it's in your view files. So it's in your .cshtml files. You should not be writing actual business logic ever in a view file. That should go into your model files. All right? So if you have to put some CSHTML in, I mean, one place you use it, you've seen this already, is if you want to add a layout file, or to say layout equals none, or to have view bag to set your title. All right? Can you use it for other things? Yes, but it should be relatively minor things. In my humble opinion, some of the examples that the author gives in this chapter, I wouldn't write them that way. You know, and I'm sure if we had Adam Freeman here, he'd smile at me and say, you know what, Jeff, when you write your own book, do it your own way. And he'd be right. All right? So you can see what we cover in here. One thing I do want to make sure you do understand, again, I know you've heard it before, you've seen it before, but this at model with a lowercase m and the at model with an uppercase m designation. I want to make sure that you do understand that. All right? Some of the other stuff in here, all right, using a layout, we've already used a layout. All right, we've used the underscore layout file. In this chapter, the author calls it underscore basic layout, which is fine. All right, then he shows you that you can add that file, but you don't need to add that file. So we'll talk about that. Pass data values from the view to the controller, you've already seen that. All right, you know, when you say return view, what are you saying? You're saying call that particular view, and that view must return something. And whatever that view returns, that's, you know, when it says return view, that's what's going to be returned. All right, generate different content based on data values. We'll look at that in a minute. Enumerate an array or a collection, and add a namespace to a view. There's one other thing that gets discussed in here that for whatever reason the author didn't mention. So I'm just going to say it to you now, and you'll see it a little bit later. That's the idea or the difference between what's called a strongly typed view and a regular view. So you're going to see that in here also, is what I'm telling you. All right, so what we're told to do is to come in, and if you would all please, because I'd still like you to do the project. So start up Visual Studio, come in, create an empty project where you choose MVC, and they do want you to just call it Razor. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm hoping we won't have any hiccups like we did yesterday. I don't want to have to give you any code. This, like I said, in my opinion, this isn't that difficult of a project that we work on in here. That said, it's possible anything can go wrong. So. Again, empty with MVC. All right, so we've got this, not a whole lot in it. You already know this. We've seen this already. You know there's nothing in the controllers folder. There's nothing in the models folder. We're going to change that right now. First thing that says that we're supposed to do is it says we're going to start with a simple model file called product.cs. So, as you've done before, go into your models folder, please. Right mouse click on it. So right click in your models folder, add, go down to class here. It's product.cs, and you can either key in the stuff that's shown right here, or you can either key that in, all right, or you can just copy it from the book, all right. But again, this would be something that would be more reminiscent of us working with a database table of products. I'm not going to go through any of those fields. We've talked about them before. All right. Again, I took this right from your book, right from the bottom or top, I should say, listing 5.1 near the top of page 96. All right. Again, if anybody has any questions on any of this stuff, stop me. But since we went through an example similar to this yesterday, I'm hoping there won't be any problems with it. All right. So the next thing we're told to do is to define a controller. So we want to add a new empty controller that we're going to call home controller, and it is shown in listing 5.2 here on the bottom of page 96. So again, come back in here, right mouse click on our controllers folder, add controller. It'll be empty. It'll be called home controller, which of course gives us our standard controller like you see right here. I'm just going to go back to page 96. I'm going to grab what's shown here, just copy the entire thing in, and replace what's there with this. All right. And if we take a quick look, I mean, this is literally everything here. All right. Couple things that are in here. First of all, using system.web.mvc. We've talked about this before. We need that because that's where that is defined. Remember, every controller basically will inherit from the controller class. So that's why we need this. All right. We are going to be working in here with, okay, Razor models. So we want to be able to use what's underneath models, and right now that's just the product. That's why we have this. If we didn't have this line of code and we tried to work with certain things and we got an error message saying it didn't know what that meant, there'd be two ways to fix it. One would be to add this line right here. The other one would be to say razor.models. And then whatever it's looking for. So in other words, notice that if I do come in here, just to show you, I'm not going to keep this, but if I say razor.models. All right, you notice that it's got product in there. All right, so it does recognize that if I wanted to use that. All right, and I'm not going to, but just to show you that. All right, but I don't want to have to do that, so that's why we've got this in here. So what are we doing? We're using that object initializer that we talked about yesterday. We're using that right here, and we're creating a new product. Notice that every product has an ID, a name, a description, a category, and a price. I've mentioned this to you before, but I'm going to keep harping on a lot of the same stuff. That is, once we get to the point where we are working in here and we're working with databases, you are not going to have to fill in the ID field. We're going to set up our ID fields as identity fields that auto increment. All right, so the system will take care of that for us. Since we are manually keying in the data, that's why we need to add this. All right, so what do we have here? Well, we've got a product field, which we said was an integer. We've got a name field, which we said was a string, a description that we said was a string, a category that we said was a string, and a price that was a decimal. There shouldn't, again, there really shouldn't be any surprises right there as far as what's in there. All right, so notice in here we've got index, but we don't have an index view. Again, you should know this by now. When we created the home controller, under views, it created a folder with the same name as our controller name without the word controller, but since we created an empty controller, there's nothing in there. When we do the project as a class, not the one that's in the book, but we're going to be doing another one, we're going to come through and we're going to take advantage of all the built-in what's called scaffolding that's provided by ASP.NET. You're going to maybe not be amazed, but you're going to go, wow, I like this a lot more. A lot less code I have to write. All right? Okay. So as it says, the controller defines an action method index, all right, in which we're going to create and populate the properties of the product object. I pass the product to the view method, etc., etc. But the bottom line is this. We currently don't have a view. All right? We're going to create one, but let's look at what the author says here first on the top of page 97. Right mouse click on the index method, select add view. You know how to do that. Ensure that the name is index, change the template to empty, and select product. This is where, to me, in my opinion, it gets really important now that you look at what's happening. Don't follow what I'm going to do, but please stop for a second and watch what I'm going to do. All right? Because I'm going to create something, I'm going to remove it right away. Okay? And why am I doing that? Because I'm trying to show you something here. If I come here, and don't do this, if I right mouse click on index and I choose add view, okay, and I keep it at index, I don't care if I use a layout page or not. That's not important here. But if it's empty, notice I cannot include a model. Does that make sense? You literally cannot. So if I click add now, and I'm going to get rid of this, the system will go and do a few things for me. All right. First of all, since I put in use an existing layout, it's going to look for a layout someplace. Well, right now, it'd be using by default this layout _layout.cshtml. That should make sense. All right. But the point is, when you look in here, there's not much more in here. All right. Now, let's contrast this. So I'm going to remove this file. So I'm going to come in here, and under here, I'm going to remove this index file. All right. And I'm going to go back and recreate it. Okay. So add view. But the difference is, instead of saying empty without model, I'm going to say empty. Why is that important? Because now I need to put in a model. All right? And if the only thing that you have in here, occasionally this will happen. Please look on the screen because this is pretty doggone important. If the only thing that you have in here is route config, okay, if that happens, let's just say it did right here. If that happens, then you should go save and do a build. Because if you do the build, then if previously all you had under models was route config, it should give you any other models that are available to you. All right? Sometimes the book might say that. Sometimes it might not say that. All right? But again, I want to follow what the author says now. So again, right mouse click on view. All right, select add view. We're going to do that. Make sure it's index. Change the template to empty. Select product. Okay, that all looks good. Uncheck the view option boxes and click add. So in other words, we don't want any of the other things checked. So I'm going to, again, right mouse click on here, add a view. It is index. I'm going to change this so it says empty, but not empty without models. Click on here, change that to product razor models, and unclick where it says use a layout page. All right, because I'm just trying to follow what I think at least are the author's instructions. Click add. The key takeaway right here is this. Now it's a strongly typed view. In other words, rather than just basically saying it's someplace in models, we're telling it exactly what it is in the models area we're going to use. All right? So even right now, I mean, all that's there is product. I get it. But if there were a lot more things there other than product, we're still saying that's the one we're looking for. All right? Yes?
My model class is offer a model with product and controllers.
Take a look. Does it look like this?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, two things I want you to realize. Number one, what this means, and I just explained that. All right. At model means we're going to be using a model. What model? It says under the Razor models namespace, find product. That's the model we're going to use. All right. The other thing is this. All right. And what does that mean? That means we don't have a predefined layout we're using here. When I did it the first time and I let that thing be checked, none of this stuff was in here. So when you don't check use a layout file, you get this boilerplate type of template, so you have something there. All right? Okay. So the author says in the sections that follow, we're going to be going through different parts of Razor views and demonstrating some of the different things that you can do with them. So notice, again, when you hear Razor, think of view files. Because what is a view file? It's an HTML file that can include C#. The C# you put into a .cs HTML or view file is Razor. All right. Now, the author mentions here then on the near the bottom of page 97, I'm going to repeat some information we touched on in Chapter 2, but he wants to give you a single focal point so you can go back and take a look at it. Same thing may happen tomorrow, where a couple of the things that the author talks about he may have already discussed a little bit in earlier chapters. All right, so it says here, again, let's start with the first line in the view, this line. So you should have that view. If you don't have it up on your screen, the view file you just created. So again, the first file there is @model razor.models.product. All right? And I don't want to read to you, but it's what I just told you. We're saying we want to associate this view with a particular file in the models folder, that being the product.cs, meaning that it's strongly typed to that particular file in the models folder. All right? That's not exactly what the author says, but you can read what the author says. All right? I'm just trying to put it in a way I think and hope that everybody will understand. All right? So, first thing the author does here is comes into the div that's currently empty. All right? So if you look at your div that's in here, there's nothing in it. And he wants you to open it up and put in that @model.name. All right? I'll leave it there, but I'm going to act like I didn't put it in yet. So I'm going to type in @model dot. This is part of the reason that you set it up like this too. Now what you should notice, the IntelliSense has clicked in. All right? So it's saying what I have available in there are some system methods like category, description, etc. Or some system variables like category, description, but also some built-in system methods like equals, get hash code, get type. But look at the bottom four. All right? Name, price, product, ID, and string. Those four and this one are the 5 fields that we had. And if for some reason, let's just say I'm a terrible speller, all right? And so I think it's categories. All right? What's going to happen is sooner or later in here, I'm going to get the red squigglies. So what it's saying is there's nothing that exists by that name. And it's letting me know that. So you get the IntelliSense help, and you get, if you had errors, it'll show you those errors before you go in and actually run the program. All right? So what we're saying here is using that model, give me the name. Well, if I go back to my products, okay, there's name, so that's what I'm asking for. And if I go back to my home controller, the name is Kayak. That makes sense? So we're going to do this. I'm going to save it and run it. And what should show is the word Kayak on screen. All right? And I'm just trying to show you that's where it's getting it from. That's all. All right? So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back over to my index.cs HTML. I can either run it from here, but I'm just going to right mouse click and choose View in Browser, and hopefully it'll bring me right there then. Notice Home, Index. It says Kayak. Everything's cool so far. And it does. Again, that's not gee whiz. It's just so you can follow the flow, so to speak, because the idea is When we get to chapter 7 of the book and we're doing the project, none of this stuff gets explained to you. It's expected you learned it in chapters 1 to 6 and you understand it. All right, that's how the author has written this book. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop the run and go back here. All right, so the author says, notice I declare the view model object using, again, the object is lowercase m. The name property comes from the model with uppercase n. And the author says, this is slightly confusing when you start working with Razor, but it becomes second nature pretty quickly. And what he's basically doing is he's warning you, I'm not telling you about it anymore. All right? It's, for lack of better words, it's a necessary evil. You got to do it that way. All right, so it says if you start the project, you'll see the following output, and we just did. All right? It says by using the @model expression, we tell MVC the kind of object we'll be working with, and Visual Studio takes advantage of this in two ways. First, it says as you're writing your view, it gives you the IntelliSense. We already saw that. All right? Equally useful is if you do make mistakes, it flags it right away, and you saw that. All right, so next the author jumps into layouts, and the author says here, the other Razor expression in index.cs HTML is this one. Okay? I want you to understand there is a difference between putting in this line of code that you see in blue on the screen and not putting in anything about a layout. If you put in this line of code, you are sending a signal to the system, I'm not using any kind of layout, be it one that's predefined or one I define. All right? But what you're going to see in just a couple minutes is it's also possible to put something in there. And that's what we're going to get to in just a minute. All right? And again, it's an example of a code block, fine. Again, it says this sets the value of the layout property to null. As will be explained in more detail all the way up in chapter 20, Razor views are compiled into C# classes in an application. So they all become classes. Do you have to worry about that? No. It's all done behind the scenes anyway. All right? It says the base class that is used defines the layout property. It says I'll show you how it works in chapter 20. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our own layout. We have not done this before. All right? Where we create our own. So the author says to do this, and it will work, but I want, before we do it, look on the screen. Because these are pretty doggone similar, these first three. Number 1 says MVC view page. Number 2 says view page with layout. And number 3 says layout page. So when you look at it, here's one, here's another one, and here's one that combines those two. That's pretty much the way it is. All right? So the author says that they want you to select MVC layout page Razor. And you'll notice that all of them are Razor files. So all of them should end with .cshtml. All right? But please look up on the screen because this is the important part. It says right-click on the Views folder, and that's what we're going to do, okay? But you don't always do that when you create a .cshtml folder. You normally do, but you don't always do that. All right, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over to the Views folder, and I'm going to right mouse click on Views itself. Not under Home, under Views. I'm going to right mouse click there and choose Add and choose New Item. Then I'm going to go look over here, and I might have to look for it. I don't see MVC in here, so I may have to look. All right, there's Code, there's Data, there's General. Well, can I open up this more? Look at that. If I open up Web, one of the things that's in there is MVC. All right? And these are the same 4 things that you saw in the book. So again, the author says we are to choose the third one, MVC5 layout page. All right? MVC5 layout page, just like that. Notice, please, up on the screen or on your screen, this is another one of those files that starts with an underscore. The recommendation is that you personally do not start any of your files with an underscore. All right? Those files that start with an underscore, for lack of better words, are kind of sending a subliminal message to the compiler that these are system files, for lack of better words. All right? Even though it's one we're creating. All right? And it says in here, it wants us to call it underscore basic layout dot CSHTML. All right? So that's what I'm going to do. Underscore basic with a big B, layout with a big L, those two things put together. And I'm not having the problem with you guys like I am with the first year people, but please, when you're asked to do this, all right, follow the instructions. And with them, the biggest problem I'm having is they're still saving files, saving folders with blank spaces in it. Don't do that. All right, run words together, use an underscore. A lot of times you can use a hyphen, but don't have blank spaces. It can potentially screw things up. All right? Okay, so what else do we have in here? So we want to do that. So the name is underscore basic layout. Click the add button, and we should get this. All right, let's look at it and see if indeed that's what we get. So I'm going to click add. There it is. Again, I can cut this down a little bit, and you'll notice doc type HTML, header, viewport, view bag title, head, body, etc. All right. So this now is a layout file that we created. All right. I want you to look up on the screen because what I'm going to tell you now is not in the book. All right. If you create a new view, and all right, and you don't check where it says use a layout file, did you all hear me? By default, it doesn't use the one you created, it uses that one. So if you want it to use yours, and you're like, I'm never even going to use this one, then get rid of it. All right? But we got it because since when we created the project, we said blank project, but MVC, it gave us that file. All right. As it says, layouts are a specialized type of view. The author has highlighted the expressions. This is the big one, right there, inside of the div, where it says render body. This right here, you know what the title tag does. Everybody in here knows that. All right, it's what's going to be in the tab at the top of the screen. So that's not that big a thing. This is what's important. So notice what the author says. The call for render body inserts the contents of the view specified by the action method, so it plops it right in there. All right. The other razor expressions in the layout, again, are just looking for the title. Okay. So the elements have been applied, will be applied to any view that uses the layout. And this is why layouts are essentially templates. When I taught this class at the college I used to teach at, all right, we did web forms. When we did web forms, you didn't do it like this. When we did web forms, you created a special page that was called a master page. And everything you wanted to be worked off the master page worked off the master page. And when we did that, it was basically set up like this most of the time. You would have some kind of a header area here in your master page. You'd have some kind of a footer area here in your master page. And normally it could be on either side, but you'd have some kind of an aside here. That would be on every page. The thing that would differ on every page would be right there where I wrote the word content. All right? We're doing the same type of thing, but it's done in a different way. When they went from ASP.NET Web Forms and they went to ASP.NET MVC, the concept of master pages went away. All right, but if you still use, so let's say Christian, graduates and gets a job and he's an ASP.NET programmer. I know he's already having nightmares about that, but let's just say it happens. And he has to go back and he has to go and look at an ASP.NET web form. That's what he's going to see. All right? Okay. So the author says, again, the elements in layout will be applied to any view that uses it. In 5.6, we've added some simple markup to the layout to demonstrate how this works. So in other words, what's in the body is going to change. Look on the screen, please. We're adding an H1 tag that's going to say project or product information. All right? Then, rather than going and styling the div in the CSS, we're putting in some inline CSS. Considered bad programming practice, but the author does it because it's a simple little example. So we'll have some 20 pixels of padding all the way around, a solid black border, and our font size will be 20 points. All right? And then we render the body. Then outside of the div, we're going to have an H2 that says, visit Apress. All right? So I'm going to just grab all of this. Okay? I'm going to copy it to the clipboard, and I'm going to go in, and right now where I have in my basic layout, where I have the render body, I'm going to replace that with this. Okay? We still need that render body, but now we're surrounding it with other content. Okay? All right. So the author says what he's added, I just told it to you. So, it says here, what do we want to do to apply a layout? And I want you to understand, okay, there's actually two different ways that we can do this. All right? I'm going to show you something, if you look on the screen, that'll be a little later in the chapter, but we haven't talked about yet. So if you would please, before we do this, look up on the screen here. Let's pretend that the next thing we were asked to do was to create another view inside of here. All right? So we could either right mouse click again in our controller, or we could just click here and choose Add and choose View. So I'm making this up. This doesn't mean anything. I'm not even going to save this. All right? So I'm going to just say, yeah, it's called View. That's fine. It's empty. That's fine. But please look on the page. Please look up here. I'm going to click Use a Layout Page. All right? Do you notice that once I click that, this becomes ungrayed? See that? So when I click here, if I want to, if I leave that empty, it's going to use the underscore layout.cs HTML. But if that's not what I want to use, I click here, and notice it lets me look all over the place. But if I go under Views, okay, and I go under Shared, okay, I've got this one. I'm trying to figure out why. Oh, there it is. So there's that basic one. So if I wanted to choose that, I'd have to go in under Views, choose this, and click OK. Then notice how it fills it in. You can always do that. We could have chosen underscore layout too. You can always do that if you want to. All right? Or I'm just canceling that. So we're already here. I don't want to go and remove that so I can create it again. So the author says, well, the other thing we can do is we can come back to our index.cs HTML file and we can just add this. All right? So they're changing in here. Up here in our index.cs HTML file, they're changing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the line that says layout equal null, and I'm going to comment that out. All right? And then I'm going to add what we want in here. So what do we have? We've got our title, and we've got the layout. I do want you to understand, because I don't know if the author ever mentions this. All right? This right here, that tilde, that means your project root. That's like, where are you going from where the project is set up? So you're saying what we want to do is from the root, go to Views, and find underscore basic layout. So what do we have? We've got, there's our project name. Underneath that, we're going to views, and underneath that, we're going to basic. The reason I'm telling you that is sometimes you'll do stuff where that'll actually be put in for you by default. And I want to make sure you'd at least heard of what that means. All right? Now, again, please look up on the screen. Since we are now using a layout, we can get rid of all this, and we can get rid of all this. So the only thing we need to keep in here is the line that says @model.name. All right? That's the only thing that we need to keep in here. The rest of the stuff is going to be handled inside of here. So when it hits that render body line here, when it hits that, it drops in the name. So it should say kayak again when we do it. So what's different? Well, now it should be in a box, basically. It should have 20 pixels of padding. It should have a bigger font size. And after it, it should have a hyperlink. Does that make sense? Yes? All right. And again, you know, like I said, I've decided maybe yesterday was a cluster, but most of the stuff we do in here, I'm doing fairly slowly because I want you to get it. Because again, when the author starts going through the project, he doesn't explain that much. All right? So the author says this transformation is drastic or dramatic. Even for a simple view, what we're left with, all right, is focusing on the presented data. So in other words, I'm going to come back to my program here. I'm going to do a file, save all. I'm going to go to my index.cs HTML. All right. I don't even have to go there because remember, I've got a home controller, which means that when I run this, by default, where am I? In my app start, since I've got a home controller, if I just tell it to run, it should run the index method, which is where I am anyway. So I should be able to just run this. It should again say kayak, but it should look a lot more classy, so to speak, than it did earlier. All right, because now it has some CSS that's been applied to it. All right, and notice here for that box, we could have given it a width, but we didn't. Since that box is in a div, and since a div, remember, is a block element, takes up the whole thing, it's pretty ugly. It doesn't look that bad when it's smaller, all right, or when you make it real small, it doesn't look bad, but when you make it big, it looks pretty ugly, all right? All right, rather than jumping in right now to using a view start file, probably a good time to take a break. It's 1:25. Let's please come back at about 1:40. And those of you who tend to walk in right at 1:41, don't do that. Please come in at 1:40.